Thank you all for being here. I am Alexandra Terry. I'm the Chief Curator of the Museum of Contemporary Art Santa Barbara. We are really honored and thrilled to be hosting this conversation. This feels like a bringing together of multiple threads of projects that we have been undertaking here at the museum, but more than anything, just an exciting community conversation and platform. So just some housekeeping up first. Currently we have this exhibition called Through What Agency on. It's part of a larger countywide project called the Environmental Alliance of Santa Barbara County Museums, which is a concerted effort of 14 institutions throughout the county to post programming and exhibitions around climate issues and environmentalism. So we do have information at the back there if you're interested in seeing what other institutions are doing. We have split our space in half, and I just want to mention that that space back there is called our community classroom, and the aim of that space throughout the exhibition is to host artists, businesses, other institutions, individuals in our community who are all doing work towards addressing our climate footprint. You know, really the idea behind this exhibition is that I am passionate about climate concerns, but I am not an expert, and so I didn't want to pretend that I was. I just wanted to open up a dialogue so that I could learn, and hopefully our community can learn from our fellow community members who are doing important work. With that being said, two upcoming events that we have in our community classroom are tomorrow we have Print Power, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. It's a local group of artists who use printmaking to address social issues. They are going to be hosting a free workshop to make a climate action poster. I think we have 2 spots, so if you're interested, please visit our website and register for that. And on Sunday, we have not a pop-up food experience, but many of you may know Rascals, the vegan pop-up and restaurant. So Dallin, the owner of Rascals, is going to be hosting a series of conversations about vegan food, vegan cooking, but also the history of the ingredients that he uses. So this Sunday is going to be Dallin presenting the history of the tortilla and talk about how to make a tortilla, how to make masa, and everybody who comes will be able to sample the tortilla that he makes. So if you want more information on all of that, please visit our website or register for our newsletter. Without further ado, I'm really delighted to introduce Deborah, DJ. I want to just say that DJ, we're really excited. We've been working on a project for a while. DJ really generously created a towel that many of you may be aware of. It was a limited edition collaboration to support the museum. And so that really, I think our relationship kind of kicked off when we started working on that. And Deborah and with Loom Art Magazine, we've been working together for so long. It's such an important resource in our community. The work that Loom is doing to highlight all of the artistic practice in our region is just outstanding, and we're so grateful to you. And we also have Ryan, who actually featured DJ in an article on the cover of The Independent, which is, of course, I was aware of DJ's work, but it really kind of brought to our attention what DJ was up to. So thank you for being here. Thank you to you all, and I'm going to hand it over to Deborah.
Thank you. Ryan, did you write that piece on DJ?
No, that was Ricky.
Oh, sorry.
That was Ricky Barajas. I do remember that piece.
It was a really good piece. Cheers to Ricky. He should be here. Is Ricky here? No. Okay. Well, Ryan did write the piece in Loom. That is the inspiration for this talk. But as Alexandra said, I'm Deborah Herrick. I'm the publisher and editor of Loom Art Magazine. and you've all have a copy on your chair. It is a free magazine, but it's fun to get one as a little gift for coming out today. I'm so excited to be here with you tonight as we celebrate our creative community and the strength of arts writing on the Central Coast. Loom Art Mag is as much about great writing and community as it is about bringing art of the here and now to the page. Each article in Loom is meant to provide an opportunity to stretch our intellectual discourse around art and culture into new territory. Tonight, it's my pleasure to bring to life the feature article, Bahala Na, DJ Javier, published in Loom Art Magazine's latest issue, our 5th issue, printed edition, with a conversation between the artist, DJ Javier, and the author, Ryan P. Cruz. DJ and Ryan are 2 Santa Barbara natives, both under 31, that are part of the new crop of creatives that are helping to shape contemporary culture in our area. Tonight, these 2 lifelong friends will discuss breaking through the noise in visual art and journalism and the cultural contexts that have shaped their work and practice. I want to tell you a little bit more about each of them before we dive in. DJ Javier is a multidisciplinary visual artist, designer, and art director known for his bold artwork that blurs the lines between art and design. DJ's work finds its focus within, but is not limited to traditional graphic design, fine art, illustration, and mural work. Drawing inspiration from the counterculture of Southern California, including surfing, music, graffiti, and street styles and aesthetics, DJ is art director of the footwear brand CV's, recently collaborated with Vans Surf on a line of shoes with his art and design. He also runs a small clothing brand, Kanto, which I definitely recommend checking out. He lives and works in Santa Barbara. What?
I paid it.
Oh. Ryan P. Cruz is Loom Art Magazine's Arts Writing Fellow. He was born and raised in Santa Barbara and worked as editor-in-chief of the channels at Santa Barbara City College before taking on a position as sports editor of Coastal View News and news reporter at the Santa Barbara Independent. As Loom's Art Writing Fellow, he has written about artists of color and diverse cultural backgrounds, delving into how their racial identities help shape and propel their work. In the future, Cruz hopes to continue working to shed light on those that are often marginalized, whether it be for their race, gender, sexual preference, or those that have been personally affected by the criminal justice system. Before we dive in, I just want to give a little signpost that the talk will be about 45 minutes long, and we'll save 15 minutes for any questions from the audience. And I'm blanking on what page the article is on. Does anyone know what page?
Somebody out there? Page 10.
Page 10, if you want to refer to the article and DJ's artwork during the conversation. So I'm going to pass my mic, and Brian is going to talk.
Yeah, so first off, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. This is awesome to be up here and be up here with DJ. And I mean, if all of us, I've got to watch DJ kind of come to the place he is in the art world right now, and it's been a joy to watch. And a little bit about myself. I've been working at the Santa Barbara Independent for about a year, and Coastal View News a little bit more than that. And this past issue of Loom was my first 2 features, and really like to get to write this type of writing and go a little bit more in depth. A little bit about my background. I had a roundabout journey to become a journalist. You know, I went to art school in San Francisco, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to pursue. I liked music, I liked graphic design, but you know, that I had a little bit of ADD and I was jumping around. And like a lot of people do in their early 20s, I was kind of dropped out of school and came back to Santa Barbara. And you know, there's not much to do when you're in Santa Barbara, and you're just kind of living a summer life all the time. And sometimes that leads to making some bad mistakes. And I got in trouble with the law, and you know, it ended up with me being behind bars for a little bit, and then eventually on house arrest for a full summer. And that summer was, I think, 3 years ago now. And you know, I decided to kind of get my act together and go back to City College. And I asked if they had a newspaper there, and yeah, found out they did. And so I started writing for the channels, and you know, that really opened up because I'd always wanted to write, but I had never really had a somewhere to publish my writing or seen my writing and come to life. And doing that, I got to meet a lot of people and tell their stories, and that kind of showed me that everybody has a really interesting story that if you found that out, I mean, it'd either break your heart or it'd inspire you. So I really wanted to keep doing that. And, you know, I worked really hard at the Independent, at the channels, and became a news editor, then an editor. And I was lucky enough after that to start freelancing at News Talk. And then Deborah also helped and gave me a job being a sports editor, which was my first kind of official job in journalism. And, you know, that really, you know, seeing your name in print really gives you confidence. And, you know, then I started Independent, and I really have tried to make it a point to cover the people that are kind of like Deborah said, marginalized or left out of the conversation, whether that be covering local news and covering housing, the community on the east side or the west side, and the Latino communities in town, and really trying to tell their stories and you know, give them the power that they deserve. And you know, it's a joy to be up here and have one of my first articles in Loom be of DJ, who has done great strides in, you know, representing for Filipino American artists. And you know, he has an amazing story. So I told a little bit of my background. I think DJ, it would be great if you told us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are and how you got to become this artist that you are now.
Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm DJ. I don't even know where to begin. So I'm from Santa Barbara. I grew up in Goleta. I went to Dos Pueblos High School. Ryan and his mom and his sister, I met them via a church that we all went to, and they were essentially like the youth. They were like kind of like the youth ministers or like youth leaders to the program. And I saw Ryan like as I was young, even when I was young, as like an older brother. And he growing up, like I felt like I was into just like, you know, obscure like art things and skateboarding things. And it turns out like, wait, Ryan likes that too. And he would just kind of like feed me like, hey, check out this like music. Here's this Burn CD, you know, of like hip hop. And so, for me growing up, I always had like a natural like knack and interest for creative pursuits. And so I went to Dos Pueblos High School. Funny enough, like I almost didn't graduate high school. I just wasn't super motivated. I didn't really have like any sort of direction. I did love to paint and draw, but I never saw that as like an actual like legitimate career path. Like I said, that whole time, like Ryan would just like put me on to like really cool things, and he's almost like the older brother I never had of like, you always like look up to someone. He was like, oh, he's like skateboarding, doing all this cool stuff. And so it's funny, obviously jumping ahead significantly, but like him writing this piece was just like, when he came into my studio, it's like, wait, this is so full circle, because like you saw me like doodling when I was like 13, and now we're like back together hanging out.
And in a way, also how you said kind of how you looked up to me in a way, like when I was, you know, struggling and you know, just skateboarding every day and kind of wandering and not going to school and working in a kitchen. I saw you kind of growing into your own and kind of doing collaborations, and I did see the Ricky Barajas cover, and that really inspired me to be like, hey, like DJ's on the cover, and I want to be able to write something on him one day. And that really, so in that way, you kind of inspired me in you know, in that full circle type of way. But like DJ said, when we were growing up, we were into, you know, skateboarding and hip hop culture that was kind of weird and you know, off to the side. And it's kind of, those things have kind of become popular culture. And I think that if you can kind of tell us how you've seen that happen and how that's helped you kind of be, you've been always doing the art you are, but it seems like the world is kind of like seeing that that's really cool right now.
Totally, yeah. I think, I feel like for my creative career, like where I am now, it's almost like, I felt like it was a little bit of like an uphill battle. Like even as I like once I figured out like what graphic design was, and once I started pursuing it, and I went to like Santa Barbara City College here, and then I transferred to the school called Azusa Pacific. And I remember being there and like reaching out. Essentially one day, like I came home from class and I thought like, man, I want to work for like all these brands, which like, I was like on Instagram and I was like, man, I'd love to work for them. I'd love to work for them. And when I got back to my apartment, I just made like a spreadsheet and I listed out everyone to work for. And I went on LinkedIn and I found out who worked at every company. I filled in the Excel sheet. I found out what their email was because I figured, well, if my email is djavier21@apu.edu, then this guy's his first name, last name at adidas.com. And so essentially like I filled that up, but it was funny because like, even though I built a portfolio and I found a way to like get in, I felt like a lot of my work, I mean, especially like within the surf industry, like there's a lot of times where like I would get into the conversation and they'd be like, this isn't really our vibe, or we don't, like, you're kind of like I got a lot like, hey, you're a little too edgy, or you're a little bit of this or whatever. And it's just funny full circle now to like work with a lot of these brands who are like, oh, we want that thing, you know, and it's like, oh, well, you didn't really want it like a year ago. So I mean, it's just, which is like fun to like, I think as a creative to like, just be like, well, at the end of the day, this is me and this is my interest and this is what I like to create and work on. And so I feel like staying true to that like really has like paid off, which has been super cool to like, you know, be like, well, this is how I like to draw on. This is like the content or the motifs or the subject matter that I like to incorporate into my work. And so, you know, in the beginning, I would get really discouraged of like, well, I should stop designing stuff like this or using this typeface or, you know, pulling this kind of inspiration because like, well, they're not going to bite at it. Like no one's going to want this. And I think just sticking to it has paid off, which has been really cool and I've been grateful for.
Yeah, and I know for me to kind of build that confidence into where you're like, oh yeah, my work can be next to this person's work, or that it can be just like that. How did that work for you? Like, I know for me, it meant people that I respect being like, oh, like this is good, this could be published here. Reach out to them and see. Did that kind of come into play when you reached out to these companies? And you know, I'm sure not all of them were like, yes, right away. Did that rejection kind of make it easier for you, or how did you build that confidence?
Yeah, I feel like even like, I mean, right now, like I've been able to like work with a lot of cool brands, which I've been super grateful for, but I feel like behind the scenes, like I've just absolutely gotten like my teeth kicked in of people being like, I'm not going to pay you for that much. Like I remember I quoted someone and I was like, oh, like for this that you're asking for, I would charge this much. And I remember telling them and then on the phone being like, I would never pay you that much money. And I was like, oh, okay. And I see that person all the time. I'm not gonna name any names. But I mean,
They here now.
Yeah, I think I just kind of use that as like coal into the fire of like, I think one of my good friends once told me, and he got it from somewhere else too, but it's not proving them wrong, it's proving yourself right. And I think that has been like a huge motivation for my work and my career of like, as much as I want to be like, oh, I'm gonna stick it to this person, it's like, I feel like I've like really shifted my mindset of like, no, I believe I can do this, and so I'm gonna get it done. Whether, I mean, sometimes it might not be like this straight line to like, I wanna do this project. It might have to be this like, I'm bouncing around and like, I have to kind of like work my way, and maybe it's not the dream project right at first, but like, I'm at least moving in that forward direction. And so for me, like taking, you know, rejection or even victories, I was like, okay, as long as I'm moving in the right direction and not kind of getting stocked up on like, oh, well, like this person said no, like I should just throw in the towel, just kind of putting your head down and like saying like, hey, I have this in mind. And yeah, I think one thing I've always told myself too is that there is no plan B. And so career-wise, I'm just like, someone's like, hey, if this doesn't work, then what's next? It's like, I have to make it work. Like I have no choice, you know? And so, yeah, I think those little like things in my mind that I've like kind of like drilled in, I feel like it's helped me a lot.
And did you have a moment where you were like, this is what I want to do for a living? Because I know that when I went back to school and I was in a program called Transitions, which is for formerly incarcerated students at City College, and you write down goals, and like your first week it's a summer program. And I remember I wrote, I want to get paid for writing. I want to write for a living. And I think that really clicked in my mind, and I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to want to do no matter what it takes. Was there a moment that happened for you, and what was that moment like?
I think I think one of my friends actually, he like illegally downloaded Adobe Creative Suite and put it on my computer. And I was like, dude, I don't even know which one is which. I don't know what Illustrator is. I don't know what Photoshop is. And once I figured out like how to like make something, I was like, oh, like, so I can make something and someone can pay me for it with money. And I mean, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a time I forget what we were working on, but we were at Starbucks at Camino.
We were designing a T-shirt for like a retreat or something.
Yeah.
And he got his notebook out, and I remember this like it was yesterday. You were so like dedicated to making this, and you were like, it's going to be like the Lord's Dogtown, and you were like throwing back to this design that we saw on this other T-shirt, and you were like, we're going to mix this and this together, and that's why like when I interviewed you, it was like full circle from that day. But yeah, you could describe it from your point of view.
Yeah, no, I mean that's like totally what it is. Of like once I like figured out like, oh, I can do something with this to like, and the thing is like I didn't even know what it was. Like I didn't know like, I mean, as a graphic designer, I'm like, even though like I had the software, I'm like, I don't know, okay, so how do I get paid for this thing on the computer? And so, but I just knew, I was like, okay, like I can figure it out from here. And so, honestly, I think once my friend, and he was like 6-7 years younger than me at the time, he was probably, I was like 18, he was like 12 or 13, and he was just like, oh, let me do this, and he was really internet savvy, and I owe him that for sure, of like, dude, you illegally downloaded Adobe Creative Suite on my computer, which helped me figure out, you know, and then YouTube obviously was huge in figuring it out. But I think once I had a rough idea of like, oh, I can like do something with this, I think, I mean, like I had mentioned before, like my terrible time in high school being like completely just like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with my life, and my parents just being like, you know, I mean, first generation immigrant parents, like they came all the way across the ocean, and they're like, our kid's kind of just like bumming around, he doesn't really have any direction. I mean, I would, you know, I'm sure I know for a fact they were super bummed, but I think once they like saw like, oh, he has something that he wants to do, and once I figured it out, like, I mean, it was just like a straight shot, like, oh, okay, like, I don't really understand this career path, but I know I want to do this, and like, I kind of like cleaned up my act, pretty much.
Yeah, and I do want to get into that, because two things that kind of really factor into both of our identities is that we're from Santa Barbara, number one, and we are first generation, and our parents are both born in another country and came here, and we kind of had different experiences with that, but similar families where, you know, I remember being in your house and there'd be a lot of aunts and uncles and a lot of big old huge batches of food and a lot of stuff going on, and, you know, we talked about this a little bit when we interviewed in the story about how growing up, we were kind of embarrassed in a way of, like a lot of first generation, and like you try to Americanize yourself, and especially growing up in Santa Barbara and Goleta, where it's a lot of white surfer, skater culture, and you kind of try to blend into that in a way. And so kind of talk about that to you, how that factored into your identity and how you came to be proud of your Filipino identity.
Totally, yeah. I think, it was hard growing up for sure, because I mean, even like, so being a Filipino person in Santa Barbara, like there's already not that many Filipino people like in general. So like growing up for me, it's like, my home life was like very traditional, like Filipino, like we would eat Filipino food, and like at one point, like there's probably like 12 people living in our house at any given moment, because like our family just kind of stuck together, and if someone came from overseas, like we would just put them in a room until they could figure out how to like find their own place. Or like both my grandmas up until they passed away, they lived with us. So there was all these like kind of like cultural things, and like the food we ate or the food I'd bring to school. And so like I had that, but then I also like, you know, my sisters would like put me on to like different kinds of music and like rap music and all this kind of stuff. And like so I was almost like raised by two different like cultures, you know. And I think growing up, like I would, you know, I've talked to like my family and like my wife especially like a lot about this, but like I remember like coming home from like the 3rd grade one day and like sitting on my bed and thinking like, I wish I wasn't like who I am. And I remember thinking like, I wish I was white, like, because I felt embarrassed by like all these like cultural, like even like small things. Like I remember I got made fun of for like, you know, I had a brown bag sack lunch and I took out a bag of chips, but they were like a Filipino branded chip, but they looked like Fritos. And some kid was like, ew, what are you eating? I'm like, oh, they're called Chippy. They're like Fritos. See, like they're curved like corn chips. And I remember the kid was being, that's disgusting. And I'm like, are you dumb? They're literally Fritos. Like, put one in your mouth. And just like little things like that like, you know, from like simple things to that to like, I mean, even more drastic things growing up. But I think for like the longest time, I was just super embarrassed about like all like the cultural like nuances and differences. And I had friends be like, dude, I've never met your parents. Like, it's because like I've never invited you over, you know, because I don't want you to meet my parents. And but yeah, it wasn't until like, I mean, like right out of college, like my wife and I, we were watching, what were we watching? This is my wife, by the way. Ugly Delicious with Dave Chang. And it's funny, like she would always ask me like, oh, tell me about this growing up, or tell me about this like thing that you guys would do. Because I mean, my mom and sisters would be like, oh, they would explain things, and I would just be like, I don't know, just ask my mom, like I don't care. And I remember watching it, and it was an episode about Chinese food. And they were all sitting at like a table. It was like David Chang and like all these other like Asian American, just kind of like TV personalities and stuff. And they started talking about like their lunch at school. And like this woman was talking about how she got made fun of. And I remember pausing it and looking at my wife and being like, wait, I got made fun of for my lunch. And she was like, finally, like now's the time that you're gonna, you know. And so we like totally unpacked this whole thing. And but yeah, I think like as I got older, like I think those feelings of like embarrassment started to like shed. But it wasn't until that moment where I was like, oh my gosh, like my story is so similar to so many other people's. And I think I began to like really, the things I started to push away, I began to like dig out of the closet. And I was like, what am I doing? Like putting these things that are like so unique and like identifiable to me and like so beautiful and rich about like my family's heritage, like I'm shoving it away. And so it's funny, I think that moment, like whenever it was like, you know, 6 years ago or so, was just like really eye-opening, because I think I felt that growing up, and I think I became less embarrassed, but it wasn't until like watching a Netflix show where I was like, wait, I like had like a huge realization in that moment of like, what am I ashamed of, you know? And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it's good that you brought up that Eddie Huang and David Chang, because it's important to have those type of people, and even like Anthony Bourdain was a big one for me, that he was going to these different countries and different cultures and showing how they're the same, how they eat around the table, they meet, and their family lives with them, and they're really similar. And I think that's really important to kind of be that way. And in the same way with me, I saw, you know, I started reading older journalists like Ruben Salazar, who was really a Chicano journalist from Los Angeles Times, and reading that and showing that you could kind of step into your identity, and you didn't have to step in these newsrooms to kind of write what they're writing and write what the white culture is writing, and kind of be yourself. That was really important to me. And also being from Santa Barbara is really important to who I am. I think I lived in San Francisco for a little bit, and yeah, I have a huge family, and all my cousins all live here, and it's hard to be away. And being from Santa Barbara is part of my identity, and that's why it's really important to me to cover local news. And we talked about this a little beforehand, that local news is kind of, you know, that's the boots on the ground of what's affecting our world. But I also want to talk about another kind of thing that is really cool about your work, is that you're able to bring these like surf shop kind of, looks like it's tagged on a ditch where people skate, and now that's in the Los Angeles Rams stadium, or now that's on these Vans shoes or anywhere. Can you talk about how you can balance, you know, being in these kind of commercial environments, but, you know, sticking true to that, you know, raw look?
Yeah, I think, I feel like at the end of the day, it's like, I think it's like establishing that like creative language and not like wavering from it. I think, yeah, as I mentioned before, like for the longest time, people would be like, I'm not really into this. And then, you know, but it's like, I had this like sense of confidence of like, well, this is my work, and like I'm confident in it. And obviously there's room for like feedback and room for growth. And for me, it's like, I always want to be like growing as a creative, and I never want to like have the feeling of like, oh, like I did it. Like I've perfected this thing. Like I always like every day, like I'll look at a painting or like a project and be like, I love it, but this is what I could have done better for like next time. And so I think always applying that. But I think one thing that I've always encouraged like fellow creatives is like find that visual language. And so whether it's like for me, it's like I want to create work where like I don't have to sign it for you to know that I created it, you know? And so I think developing that, whether it's through like color palette or like motifs or like how you execute like your line work, or you know, I'm sure it can be translated to even like writing, you know, of like, oh, like this sounds like a Ryan piece, you know? Or, I mean, whatever it is, whether it's like cooking or whatever it may be, to have that kind of like, almost that like, I don't need a signature mentality of like, this is just what it is. Like, you can tell that I worked on it. And so I think kind of being confident in that and just like applying myself to like get better with that. And so it was cool, like even like as you mentioned, like doing like that project with the LA Rams, you know, I was just kind of like taken back of like, are you sure you want these drawings? Like, I drew them on my couch in my underwear. Like, I don't know if you really, you know, but like it was cool to like be embraced by that. And I think, I mean, it took a while to like get there, even though they're like simplified like 3-color drawings with just like really simple line work. I think all of the work to get there of like developing like, oh, this is my style, this is how I like to draw, like, and kind of like honing in on it. You know, so it's like I said, it's like that whole like, oh, I don't need a signature for you to know that like I worked on it kind of thing.
And another thing about DJ growing up that I don't know a lot of people know, he's a really funny guy, and he's really he's got a great sense of humor and just a playful way of thinking and just like playing with ideas. And you know, if you say something, then he'll come up with something witty to come back to that. And I want to know how that plays a role in your work, and did that help you kind of, you know, be loose with your characters, or how does that factor in?
Yeah, I think I feel like how I see my work sometimes is like, I think for me being like a traditional like graphic designer, like creative director, and then also like a fine artist, like I feel like having both has really helped out just my creative process. And I think like the graphic designer in me like really enjoys having parameters. Well, I mean, I guess some graphic designers don't like having parameters, but I kind of like when someone's like, this is literally what we're working with, like this is our brand colors, or like you have to use this thing. Like when I did the Rams thing, I was like, I've never drawn a ram. Like, does the horn go like this? Does it go like this? You know, so I was like, I don't know how to do that. And so I think, I feel like with a lot of my work, like sometimes I'll be like, oh, what if I did like this with this? Like that'd be kind of funny. And then I kind of force myself to like draw these like things together, like these like motifs together. And so I think like having just like, I don't know, like in my mind, like kind of like making jokes with myself about my own work of like, I don't know, like even like kind of like going back like the Rams project of like, for me to think like, what if I gave a ram a surfboard? That'd be kind of funny. Like they would never draw that. And I was like, how do I draw a ram holding a surfboard? And it's like, I almost like had to like figure out, I had to put parameters on myself. And then like, you know, I feel like for me, I feel like that's where like a lot of my best work comes from, is when I'm kind of like cornered into like, I have no choice, I have to do this. And I think having just like a sense of humor of like, oh, that'd be funny if I did something like this. And then thinking like, well, how do I actually like activate that and have it come to life? And so I think having like a third grade sense of humor is helpful sometimes.
It can be. So another thing we kind of talked about was that when you got into surfing, and you kind of got into surfing a little bit later, and you know, that kind of made you think about your racial identity and how surfing is kind of heavily white culture growing up. And for me, it was kind of being on the other side of the law, where I wasn't able to be white anymore because I was in the eyes of the law, because I kept getting in trouble. I saw that I was getting a different sort of treatment, and I was just another Hispanic male, 5'8", whatever description. And that really affected me, and that made me sit with my identity and kind of research, who am I, where's my family from, what does that mean? What does that mean to be growing up in California, in Santa Barbara, where, you know, it was once part of Mexico. Before that, it was the Native Americans lived here, and, you know, all these different empires come and change the whole landscape of the place. And where do I fit in here as somebody who's, you know, family isn't even from Santa Barbara, but I'm from this community now, and I'm a member of this community. How does that factor into your work of your Filipino identity, and how was that process of finding that?
Yeah, I think I don't know, I think like even like within like the perspective of surfing, like I think growing up, like I don't know if you guys ever watched like Fuel TV, which was like an action sports like channel, and like I would always watch it, and it would always come to surfing, and I'd be like next, and I would like like I would either just like go back to SpongeBob or whatever, which I would watch until I was like, I mean, I would still watch it now, but I remember like, cause I would always skip over surfing because I'm like, well, it's all just like, no offense, like Jack Johnson looking white dudes, like how can I relate to this? But then like I would like skip ahead in the guide and be like, oh, like Skate Maps, which was like a show where like the New York skate team would like travel around the world, and it's like, oh, they got like a Mexican dude, and like they got an Asian dude, and they got a black dude, and like, oh, I can see they dress like me, and like I would always like gravitate towards that. And so I think for me, like surfing, I was just like, oh, that was never in the cards growing up. Like, and even like going, whenever my family would go to the beach, we'd go to Goleta Beach, and like, which was primarily like, it's mostly like people of color really who go to like Goleta Beach, at least for me growing up. And like, whenever I'd go in the water, like I would only go like up to like my knees. Like I thought like the ocean is like, and the ocean is a scary place, but I was like, it's dangerous, like don't go. And so, yeah, and I think like, I mean, even like I didn't learn how to swim until I was like 17. Then I didn't learn how to surf until I was 18. And once I learned, like I got super into it. And then I started to see kind of like the holes of like, oh, like this is like a super exclusive sport. And like someone like me in the lineup, like I'd stick out like a sore thumb half the time. And like, and I think, yeah, it's been like hard to like navigate that, but it's been really cool to see like this like uprise of like just like a much diverse community that was always there, but now they're beginning to like really like bubble up, which is cool. And I think from there too, it's just like it's really influenced like my perspective of like I've been like really introspective of like my own identity because of it. I think it's like opened a lot of like doors for me, just like things like I'll think back, I'll like have a weird interaction like in the water, and then like I'll kind of like unpack like my own identity out of it, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, representation is huge, and I think for me, seeing that in different publications and stuff, because in the Independent, I mean, I'm one of the only Latino reporters. I think I am, or no, there's a couple now, but in a lot of newsroom scenarios, I'm outnumbered. In a lot of, you go to City Hall and you see you're kind of outnumbered, even in a city where we're really a large percent Latino, and to kind of see that, and it was really important for me to try to be in there, and instead of, I remember when I first went to college at City College, right after high school, I wasn't ready yet, and I signed up for journalism, and I didn't like it. They were like, I was like, oh, I want to write my own thing, and oh, I don't want to be part of this, the media, and I realized that you kind of have to be inside and to kind of fight that. And do you see that in the art world where you come into some of these galleries and maybe you're the only Filipino American artist, and you're outside, but you're in there now, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think I've had experiences where like I'll be invited to like a group show, and then I show up and I'm like, ooh, I'm really out of place right now, like, and so I think even with like, and I've been super grateful and blessed for like the success of like my recent work. Like I feel like a lot of the times I still feel like, man, I'm on the outside, or like, and I think it's tough to kind of like have that perspective. And I think at the end of the day, it's like all the work I do is like, as much as like I'm stoked on it for myself, it's like, it's for like, I picture like the 13-year-old version of me that was like, who would have never thought in a million years that they would do anything remotely like this. Like, dude, that's for you. Like, this is like, we're knocking down these doors, and that's like, this is your route, like take it, take it from here kind of thing. And so, yeah, it's been like, yeah, I think I've been able to, yeah, like I said, I'm grateful for these opportunities, and yeah, just trying to like, I don't know, like kind of.
And do you get to ever sit back and kind of think about, like 13, 14, 15-year-old DJ? Because I know for a fact if you saw a video of yourself now, you'd be like, oh, that's a cool kind of like that's exactly what I want to be doing. I mean, like you said, if you just saw your Instagram post of your Vans collaboration when you were 15-year-old, you would probably have blown your mind. How would that? Do you ever have that moment?
Yeah, I think. I mean, even when like I had like this project that just came out, like when I got the email, I was like, oh, this is a scam. Like someone's like trying to like take my money right now, like trying to ask for my social security, and you know. And I was like, and I looked at the email, I was like, oh, like that seems legit. Like they're little. It wasn't like, oh, vans@gmail.com. That has to be real. Like, you know, I think being able to go through the process, and I think even, yeah, I mean, it's been cool to see, to like kind of step back and like look at something like that and be like, I never would have thought. Like I remember when I bought my first pair of blue Vans, like in the 6th grade, and then to be on the other side of this and being like, to be working with like the Vans team and to be like, hey, what do you want to do? And it's like, are you really asking me what I want to do? Like, is this a joke? You know? And so I think, yeah, I still get like tripped up all the time with like, you know, opportunities. Like, I don't know, I feel like it's that balance of like not getting like ahead of myself of like, oh, I deserve this thing, but also being like humble and grateful for like, this is really cool that like I've been able to do this, and I've been like God has brought me this far with like my career and my work, you know. And so yeah, I mean, I feel like if I were to like look back, if like my 13-year-old self were to see myself now, he'd probably be like, he looks good, he's trim, he's finally not this tall and this wide. No, I think I think like thinking back, I feel like, yeah, like I said, I remember when I bought my first pair, and to be like on the other side of it's just like, it's like the biggest trip, you know?
And I mean, you talked about this a little bit, and you know, you loved skateboarding growing up, but you weren't the best, just like I probably wasn't the best either. And how did you, I think with writing that was the same thing. It probably wasn't the best at first. I always liked to write, but I think it took a while before I was comfortable with my voice and what I wanted to say. How did that work with because I know your newest work, you're very comfortable, your line work, it's very strong, your compositions are packed and well thought out. How did the process come from, you know, like you said, doodles in your notebook to really thought out designs?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I did a talk with a few students at La Colina Junior High, and they were 8th graders, like on the verge of graduating, and I was talking to the teacher, and I was like, what do you think they want to hear? Like, I don't want to just be like rambling off about stuff. And she was just like, if you just encourage them on like their work, because a lot of them are hard on themselves. And so I think one thing that like, I started thinking about like my own work and like what has helped me like develop as an artist. And one like big takeaway that I gave them, and like I gave a talk at like Santa Barbara High School too, and I feel like just showing up for your work all the time is like key, because at the end of the day, it's like someone can be naturally talented, like, which is awesome, but like natural talent is only like this far, but like showing up for your work is like, that's what's gonna like keep pushing you forward, you know? And so if I were to even look back at like the stuff like I did like last year, the year before in high school, I'd be like, that is terrible. But like the fact that like every day, whether it's like I did a little napkin drawing or I had an idea and I wrote it down on my phone, like that's like the little push ahead. And so that was one thing that like I told these students of like, who cares if someone's good at like drawing, like whatever, like figure out your own thing, like whatever, you know, for me, like as a painter, it's like, if you look at my paintings, like everything, if you look really closely, like the lines actually aren't that like crisp and like straight, like they're actually really wobbly, because like I get nervous and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's getting wobbly. And I've learned to just be like, well, wobbly lines are my thing then. Like I'll just embrace the fact that like it isn't perfect. And I've kind of taken like my weakness and like flipped it to be like, oh, okay, well, like I guess this is my thing, and how do I like hone my weakness and kind of get it under control and turn it into a thing. And like even when it comes to like, if you were just someone who asked me like, hey, can you like paint something and like blend some colors and do some shading, I'd be like, nope. But if you give me a can of turquoise and a can of red and a can of black paint, I can figure something out. And so I think it's just like being like, okay, this is who I am as a creative, and like this is how I can kind of run with it. But I think it's that idea of just like constantly showing up for your work. It can be like, if you think about your career as like a big like mountain, like some moments are big boulders of like, for me it's like, you know, I keep rambling about, but like this band's collaboration I was able to do is like, that's like a massive boulder that I just put on the pile of like, on the mountain of like my career. But like a bunch of these like small pebbles of like just showing up for my work and like doing some napkin doodles and like writing down ideas, like those also matter too, to like build this like big mountain of like who you are as a creative person. So I think always investing of like just do something, you know, because at the end of the day, like natural talent is just like it's just like a little bit of like a head start. Like when you're playing Mario Kart and you like hold down the trigger at the right time, and then it takes off, and you're like, it like gives you just enough boost, but it's just like at the end of the day, it's like you got to get the mushroom, baby. Like that's what we're talking about, you know. And so
Yeah, and it's very much the same with writing. I think you have to, or anything you want to do, just go out and do it. And if it's not perfect, then that's fine. I think deadlines were the best thing that ever happened to me. Once you have to turn something in, I mean, even the covering a small event or my weekly sports section, I use that as like that's practice too. This is knowing how to put these together and put this storyline together. And I don't always get to decide what the story is going to be. Even when I met up with you for an interview, I know you and I know what I love about your work, but I don't know exactly what's going to come out of it. And, it's a new thing every time. How are we doing for time, Deborah?
It's about time to, I'm going to take a second with the audience. But yeah, it's about time to open us up to some questions from the audience. I just want to highlight something. You both, from what I know of you and from working with you both, are extremely hardworking. And I really appreciate that you've underlined that in the conversation, because I do feel like a lot of people are waiting to be discovered, and that's not exactly how it happens. The LA Times didn't discover DJ or Loom or Surfer's Journal. Like, none of us discovered him. He was there working a lot, and then we joined the conversation. So, and the same with Ryan, who is extremely hardworking. So that would be my 2 cents about hard work. And anyone else want to open up? I'm sure we have some great questions. So I'll walk around with the mic. Does that work for you, Larry? Yeah. So that we can keep the audio for our video documentation. Okay.
So my question is, DJ, has your Filipino culture influenced your graphic or art style, and if so, how?
Yeah, it for sure has a lot. I think there's moments when like I have more free range where I'm like, oh, I can absolutely just like be like, hey, this is what I want to do. Like this is like down to like these shoes, like they have the Filipino flag like in the checkerboard, which I redesigned, and like some of like the motifs, like there's like a warrior on one shoe and like a rice field worker on the other. Things like that where it's like, oh, I can clearly just like, I can just go for it. But there's obviously moments like, especially being like a commercial graphic designer where like, it might not be like fitting per se. And so things like, like a lot of the times I'll work on things where people are like, oh, I had no idea you worked on it. And so I think that's like the kind of like the graphic designer of me of like, I kind of have to mold to like whatever client needs are. And so, yeah, I think like even like subconsciously, like under that, I think I've been really influenced by like, just like my dad, who immigrated here from the Philippines. Like he just like literally like worked so hard to like bring a better life for his family. And so for me, like in the back of my head all the time, whether it's like I'm working on like a painting or I'm presenting to a really big client or I'm trying to like pitch myself to someone, I think just like picturing like my dad came across the ocean, he left everything to come here. It's like I have an obligation to like literally give my all with everything I do, whether it's like a little project, whether I'm like working on like an email blast and I'm like scooting over like a picture like 10 pixels to the left, or I'm working on like a massive mural. It's like I think my heritage, whether it's like overt of like, oh, I can see the symbolism in his work, or it's just like my work ethic of like my dad worked his butt off to like get here and he risked it all. So it's like, why am I gonna do like an okay job when he like just was like, this is here, we're going, the whole family, like we're gonna go across the ocean and like just kind of figure it out. And so, like I said, whether it's like overt with like the subject matter or just like who I am as a creative, it's like it's always like spinning in my head.
Will you sign my yearbook?
Yes.
Specifically the 2011 one where you get voted for something. I forget what it was.
We went to high school together.
Shout out to you guys. Shout out to the G. I just wanted to ask a more serious question. both of you are in fields that are historically have been dominated and kind of controlled by a certain population, right? And the narrative has always been really difficult for consumers to kind of really digest if they're not part of a creative class or like really aware of these things, right? So nowadays in both of your fields, where do you see that narrative going, and or where do you hope it will lead to?
Yeah, I can start off. I hope that I can help contribute to, make the narrative a little bit more wide to include, more people that, like you said, you pick up a newspaper from the 50s or something, and it's just one side of the story, and you look in the history books, and there's a lot more to it than that. I hope that I can keep finding people that feel like they've been left out, because I've really tried hard to, at the Independent at least, like reach out to people that don't like the Independent, that say the Independent has always covered it this way, and talk to them and meet with them and try to tell their story and, rebuild that trust. And I think that's kind of something I've learned from, in other communities where you have to rebuild the trust. Like if police are over and over treating one side of the coin different, then you have to rebuild the trust with that people. So I hope I can, help widen that narrative and just contribute to it to include everything and what I feel like is the story too.
Yeah, and I think for me, as I'd mentioned before, it's like, I think encouraging that younger version of me of like, dude, this is your thing too. And I mean, growing up, like it took me forever to even to get to this moment, like I felt like it was hard to see people who liked the same things as me or like did the same kind of work. And I think to hopefully like encourage, like I said, like the young, like 12-year-old, 13-year-old kid who's like on the computer too, and he's like, who might have like, for instance, like parents who might not approve of like, you want to do what for a living? To be like, no, this is actually a really viable career. Like you can pursue this and you can like have this be real. And so, yeah, like I said, like if I were to go back in time, like I would have never thought like I'd be able to do this kind of work that I love. And so I think, hopefully like being a part of like a bigger movement of like, especially for like the Filipino and like Asian American community that like, dude, like the corporate boardrooms, they don't need to look like the same kinds of people. Like you very much so belong there too. And like your opinions and perspective also, matters, and like you should be heard for those things, and your story should be told. And so, yeah, like I said, like with this collaboration is like super huge for me, and like to be able to tell that story and hopefully, find like the young version of me to see it and be like, dude, I want to do that too, and like I want to do it even bigger and better than he did. Like I love that. Like I want that. Like I would love for like a wave of like the young version of me to just like a bunch of these kids just start like absolutely like crushing it and doing really cool work and like pass me up. Like I would love that, to see like people just like really stoked and like going for it. And so yeah, to hopefully just like continue that momentum and like kick down the door. And and I think for me, I felt like like sometimes like the door of opportunity is like locked, and that's where I say like just cut a hole in the wall and like go right through, like make your own thing. And so yeah, being able to kind of like do that, and like I said, encourage the younger generation to like pursue it and show that it's theirs too.
Hi there. Question for DJ. So with all the years of you honing your craft, really finding your own personal style as a painter, how did you know when you finally realized what your personal style was and like your trademark per se?
Yeah, I think I feel like I have a hard time with that even now, but I think I feel like continuously like reviewing my own work and seeing like what bothers me about it. Like there's like a lot of work that I have that I'm like, oh, I'm super excited about this, and like I think there are moments where I'm like I'm super critical and figuring out like, okay, why am I not as excited about this? And I think for me, even like I feel like at some of my paintings, like I'll do like there's one of like a Filipino warrior like in like the magazine where there's like two warriors and their hair is like painted in a way where like
there's like kind of like a shading to it, but the shading is like super hard, like pointy lines. And I think there was one day where I was like working on something and I like was drawing something and I made a stroke and I was like, oh, I wonder if I could like repeat that stroke multiple times to like create like a texture. And then like once I figured out like, oh, I really like how this looks, I began to like figure out like, okay, how do I like hone it in more and make it like how do I like tame it and like control it and learn like when to use it and when to not use it. And I think, yeah, I think just like I said earlier, like showing up for your work and figuring out like, okay, I love doing this and I don't like doing this, or like this bothers me, why does it bother me? Should I learn to like evolve it, or should I just ditch it and have it be like, well, that's maybe not really like something that I do for my work necessarily. And so, yeah, I think like I began to like figure out like, okay, what are like the things of like, I always like using black paint. Like black paint is just always like the top color for like my work, and I think it's the graphic designer in me and like screen printer who's like, oh, it's just like the top layer that traps all the color in. And like things like that are like, oh, I just like drawing hands like this because I hate drawing hands, so I'm just gonna make the hands really pointy and the fingers just like. So I think that you begin to like learn tricks and you just like put it in your arsenal, which can be applied to anything, whether you're like a musician or like, you know, a writer or like a chef or whatever. Like there might be things that are like, oh, this is my toolkit and I'm gonna experiment out of it, but like at least I have a home base creatively of like, I like to come back here and start here.
Okay, I think that will end our questions now, and I will really want to thank Alexandra and the Museum of Contemporary Art for hosting this conversation, and it's really been a privilege, I think, for all of us to hear this incredibly honest and open conversation between Ryan and DJ. As much as I know about both of their work, I felt like I learned a lot tonight, and so I really want to thank you, and thank everybody for coming out, so thank you.
I was going to say, we love your references, by the way. That was really wonderful. I really love all your references. When you're like talking about your 25 years, it's just like in Margaret. Or like,